Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some functions that we can use on the label text itself. So these we call with the LBL label.text dot, and then it brings up a huge list of many built-in functions. We're only going to be looking at two of them that I found we use a lot when we're developing apps and modifying the label text. So again, each of these will kind of only modify the text when run, so we won't necessarily see the change right away. Okay, so now we've seen how to modify the text of a label, and that was just by calling LBL label.text, so the name of the label.text, and we can give it a new value. So we can give it any kind of a string value, whether that's passed in as a string directly, or it could be a string variable, or something converted to a string. Now let's take a look at some of the functions that we can call on the text of the label itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment this out, because it's being kind of annoying and giving us this warning all the time. And also we're not using it right now. So we'll get more into this kind of assignment in the next part. So what we can do is we'll call LBL label.text, and we'll call dot, and it will give us this huge list of functions. Okay, so not all of them are useful in this context. I'm just going to go over two that I found particularly useful. The first one is going to be append. So we can append either a character or a string. I'm going to look at the string one. So if we just select this, then it prompts us to enter a string. So if we want to add something onto the end of it, I'm just going to say is awesome. And so there we go. So now ideally this will assign this constant, then it will assign the text to contain this string, and then it will add this string onto the end of it. So by the end we should get Mammoth Interactive is awesome. So let's go ahead and run it. And again, this is just the triangle up here. We can choose which kind of emulator we want to run it with. I'm choosing the iPhone SE, but feel free to choose whatever you want, just as long as it's the same phone that you're designing your layout on. Okay, and here we go. We get Mammoth Interactive is awesome being printed out. And that's exactly what we want, so we know this function is working properly. Okay, so the second one that I'm going to show you is going to be the remove all. So it's going to be LBL label.text dot, and then it's way at the bottom. And where is it? Remove all. So this just replaces a string with an empty string. So basically just gets rid of the text. Okay, so the reason this might be useful is that perhaps we want some kind of a condition where we display a message, and then if this condition isn't met, then we want to remove any kind of message or text that was there before. So if we run this again, so I just stopped it and reran it, has to again build and compile and take in the new text or the new code, and here we go. So nothing appears, it's just blank, and that's because we have removed all of the text here. Okay, so these are two functions I found particularly useful when developing these apps. There are, like I said, there are many more functions, and you can see for yourself just by calling the .text dot and then having that huge list of functions. This next part will focus on this kind of assignment and the functions that we can use with this. So in this part we showed you some functions that we can use on the label text itself. So previously we'd just shown how to modify the text. Now we're going to take a look we modified the text by assigning a new string. Now we're going to take a look at some functions that we can use to kind of further what we've learned so far. So we looked at the append and the remove functions. So the append function basically just stuck another piece of a string onto what we had previously. So that's very useful. There will be many times where we have some string already, then we just want to add text to it. So that's going to be where we'll use the append function, and then the removal functions just kind of clears the label text and leaves us with a blank string. So we saw that there were many more functions, so go ahead and check some of them out, play around with them a little bit, and in this next part we'll be talking about doing the other way around. So this is going to be, we have some kind of text in the label already, and we're just going to pull that out and kind of modify it within the code. Or rather, we're going to take it and store it in a variable to be modified. Okay, so now we're going to show you how to do the opposite of what we were doing before. We're going to extract text from a label rather than putting it in or modifying it. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the label text, we're going to store it in a variable or constant, so that way it's not actually going to modify the label text itself, it's just going to take what's already there and store it in a variable or constant. We're also going to show some functions that we can call on this variable or constant, and this will be useful more so for text inputs, but also is useful to know for labels. Okay, so now we've seen how to assign and modify the label text itself. So we were using these functions. We called the lbl_label.text. We can either assign it a value, or we can call some more functions such as .append and .removal. Now we're going to take a look at something doing the other way around. So we're going to basically pull the label text and do something with it. So here we saw that briefly we just kind of assign this constant text to contain whatever the lbl_label.text has right now. So after all of these assignments it should be blank because we removed all. So I'm just going to comment that out so that the text now contains Mammoth Interactive is awesome. Okay, and I know that this warning is saying that text was never used, so consider replacing it, but we're going to still not worry about that right now. Okay, so this is basically how you pull the text and store it in a variable. So this variable will now contain whatever text is in the label. So it should contain Mammoth Interactive is awesome. And again, we can call many functions on this. So there's again this huge list of functions. Just so you guys know, the ones that have the red line through them are functions that we can't use in this particular context, but we might be able to use it the other way around. For example, we could use the append function if we're assigning or we're changing the text, but this is just pulling the text, it's not actually modifying it, it's just storing it in a variable, so we could no longer use these functions. And that's why they have the red line through them. So what we can do is we can, for example, this capitalized function will basically just produce a string that's the same as Mammoth Interactive is awesome with just everything capitalized. So if we do the is capitalized, then it just takes all of these. So Mammoth and Interactive are already capitalized, but it would also capitalize is and awesome. Okay, and then what we can do is, I'm just going to change this to a variable so that we can modify it. Send text equals lbl_label.text dot, and let's see what other functions we can use. I think that, and in fact, this one would not be a good time to use this. I'm going to change it back to a let, and I'm going to create a new variable. So I'm just going to say a new constant. I'm just going to say this is called index. And the reason we'll call it index is going to be apparent in just a second here. So what we can do is we can call the end index or the start index of this string. I find the end index function particularly useful because this kind of returns the end index of the string that is in our label. So if we don't know how long the string is, this will return the index, so basically the length. Okay? So that's a very useful function. Another useful function might be, if we go to, where is it, the start index, there's also the substring function, so this returns a new string containing the characters from one index to another, so we just have to specify an index there. And the other one's a start index, which is doing a similar thing to the end index, but it's finding the initial index. Okay, so these are some of the functions that we can call on. Basically, we can pull a variable and we can create this variable or constant, and it will pull certain values from the label. So although these don't actually modify anything within the label, they just kind of take what's already there and can store it in this case, a constant, or we can store it in a variable. Okay, so this is how to modify the text. This is just how to take in the text and use it. This will be more useful with kind of text fields, which are going to be the input texts rather than the output text. But it's a good thing to know, just in case there is something in a label that we want to be able to take out and store in a variable. Okay, so in this part we showed how to extract a text from a label. So we store the current label text in a constant and then perform some functions on it. So the functions we called were the index functions. This gets the start or the end index. This can be particularly useful for determining the size of a label, as well as the capitalize function, which basically just takes whatever text is there and capitalizes each word and then returns it. Okay, so those are just two of many functions that we can call on the text once it's already extracted. Just keep in mind that this isn't actually modifying the text of the label itself, it's just taking what's currently there and storing it in a constant. So we're going to go ahead and show you how to change the text alignment. So this is where the text is in relation to the screen, so centered, left, right, stuff like that. So we're going to call the text alignment operator on our LBL label. So this is no longer LBL label.text, this is LBL label.text alignment. Okay, so it's a completely different function. So we're going to change it right in the code so that as the app runs, the text can change around rather than as an attribute, because if we change it as an attribute, then it's set up that way, and until we change it in the code, it's always going to be that way. There may be some instances where we want to move around the alignment and change it while the app runs. Okay, so now we're going to show you how to set the text alignment in the code itself. Now this, if we click on the label, this was something that we could assign up here. So in alignment we have either right, left, center, or this kind of even center. Okay, so we can either assign it up here, or we can move it around while the code runs so that we can kind of change the alignment up a little bit. So another thing we could do is we could change the font up, but that's a little more complicated, and it's better just to change it directly in the attributes field. So usually it's on custom, or it's on system, but we can change it to custom and change the font around this way. So there's a whole bunch of different fonts, then there's different styles and the size, and we can do it that way. Okay, but for now we won't worry about the fonts, we'll just look at the alignment. So I'm just going to create this function that's going to be called change alignment, and we're going to take in no parameters again, and I'm just going to call this in the view.didLoad. So change alignment, that shows up, excellent. So what we're going to do is we are going to call right now we have to recognize that the text is at the left hand side. So again, modifying attributes here, we'll see the changes right away. So we could do this and we'll see it centered. But we're just going to set it to default so we can change it in here and watch it change. So if we go LBL label dot text alignment this time, then what we can do is we need to recognize that text alignment is a NS text alignment. So what we can do is we just select it and then equals NS text alignment, and then we can call dot, and then it gives us these list of values. So we can have it centered, we can have it justified, left, natural, or right. Okay, and we can also give it values as well. So I'm just going to have it centered for now. So if I select center, that ensures that the text will be centered. So if we were to run this, I think it was still running, so I just stopped it and reran it. And I know we get these warnings, initialization of these variables is not used. That's fine, don't worry about that. Okay, so it's generally not a good idea to have variables initialized that you're not going to use, but in this case I just use them to demonstrate a point, so we don't need to worry about them. So let's open up the simulator, and well, it's kind of hard to tell, but the text is centered there. So let's just make the text a little smaller so that we can really see that it's centered. I just commented out the is awesome line, so now it only contains Mammoth Interactive. Okay, and notice this window's coming up. We can just get rid of this if we want by just selecting the size and dragging it all the way to the left. There we go, much easier to see. So now the text is centered here. We can see that our alignment is working. if we wanted to change that to right, then we could do that too. And let's see what that would look like. It should just shift everything over to the right, but let's just make sure that's all working as it should. And there we go. See, the text is all on the right there. Okay, so this is text alignment. This is how to change the alignment in the code itself. I'm just going to change this back to center, and I'm going to uncomment out that line again. Okay, so this is, yep, again, how to change the alignment. It is not necessarily as useful as being able to change a text, but there may be times when you do want to change the alignment kind of halfway through running the code. Okay, and also if we're changing values of text, then sometimes it looks better to have it centered, sometimes better to have it to the left. So, you know, it's really up to you, but this is how you can change it in the code. And also, aside from the code, you can also change it in the attributes by doing it here. Okay, so in this part we just showed you how to change the text alignment. So this is how to basically move the text around from left to right, so we could have it starting at the left, starting at the right, or centered, or whatever we desire. So we had to call the LBL label.text assignment, so this was no longer LBL label.text, so it's LBL label.text alignment. Okay, and we also needed to call the NS text alignment to specify whether we wanted it centered, or right, or left. Okay, so this is how you change it in the code. We could also change it in attributes, but again, that won't modify it once the code runs, and unless we change it while the code, unless we change it in the code itself, then that's how it's going to be forever in the app.